Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Deanna Faye and I normally like to talk about the creative process. Welcome back, and if you're new, thank you so much for joining me today. So I first heard about the book The Body Keeps the Score, I want to say in the year 2015 maybe, and at the time the idea that the body was not more important, but equally as important as the mind when healing PTSD and trauma was actually somewhat revolutionary, or at least to me it was at the time. I was quite a bit younger and I did not know at the time, but I later was diagnosed with PTSD. When a person is traumatized, it can feel very difficult for that person to communicate with others and to find words to share what we're feeling or thinking. Research shows that there's actually a scientific explanation for that as well, but this is a large part of why trauma can be so isolating. The author of The Body Keeps the Score writes that communicating fully is the opposite of being traumatized. Being able to share thoughts and feelings with others and the world is crucial to healing that isolating effects of trauma, and it allows us to be seen, heard, received, validated, and even loved, especially if we were neglected or ignored or silenced before. At the same time, creatively expressing ourselves can be a direct response to traumatic events, which I think is really interesting because trauma can make us both silenced and quiet, but it can also make us have an urge to express ourselves and to share what we're feeling. And to quote Leonard Bernstein, who wrote the speech for the John F. Kennedy Memorial in 1963, "This will be a reply to violence, to make music more intensely, more beautifully, more devotedly than ever before." But some traumatized individuals avoid creatively expressing themselves because it can feel too scary to do so, because it means being vulnerable. And while engaging in the creative process increases vulnerability, it can also improve our problem solving, which was found by Thompson in 2019. And according to Thompson, the author of Creativity, Trauma, and Resilience, engaging in the creative process actually improves our problem-solving skills and coping strategies, as well as promotes resilience and hardiness. And see how this could be especially important in healing trauma. There are a lot of myths surrounding creativity, including the idea that it comes to us in a moment of brilliance, like a spark of brilliance or a eureka moment, and unexpectedly. Another myth is that creativity is only reserved for the arts or the aesthetic arts. But according to researchers expanding the study of creativity, for example, Cropley in 2016, creativity actually operates on a continuum of subtle markers of creativity. So it's not you're creative and you're not. There are different forms of creativity, and there's markers that are quite subtle that you can see on a spectrum. So anything as small as creating something, a dish, a meal, or arguably that's not that small, to creating a masterpiece of art like Leonardo da Vinci. The problem today with the way that media portrays creativity, talent, and art is it's actually really very bad at highlighting actual creativity. And that is why we see so many creative artists who are undersold and undervalued, while more derivative, mediocre artists are praised. The creative process is not easy. It's the result of hard work, time, and effort, and it requires skills, not all of which are technical either. For example, to create requires problem solving and problem recognition, as well as the ability to be emotionally expressive, imaginative, and the ability to produce original ideas, to be intellectually curious, and to present what you've created in an intellectually curious way. And this comes from the Torrance Tests of Creative Thinking, which is a study from 2011. To To create something actually requires effort over time, utilizing skills. It's not like a spark or flash of brilliance that people might think it is, but sometimes when you create something, you can get this feeling like you are being overcome with a flash of brilliance, or almost like a mystical feeling. And there's actually an explanation for that. On this channel, I talk about something called creative intuition, or an intuitive process specifically for songwriting. But in this video, I want to expand that idea to the creative process and to creating art overall. This intuition or feeling that can be felt in the creative process is also an important factor in creativity. It unconsciously guides the creative process. Henri Poincaré was a French polymath and pioneering mathematician whose observations can teach us about the important role of the unconscious incubation in the creative process. The subliminal self is in no way inferior to the conscious self. It is not purely automatic. It is capable of discernment. It has tact, delicacy. It knows how to choose and to divine. And I think this is really interesting because we often think of our unconscious and subconscious mind as doing things without reason or without discernment, and just sort of like almost like an animalistic unconscious feeling. But Poincaré was actually pointing out that the unconscious mind is not fully automatic. It's actually able to discern, to decide things, and to have tact, and it understands delicate information. And this is really interesting to me as an artist, as a creative person, someone that engages with the creative process and thinks about creativity very often, because although it's something maybe intuitively felt, it's hard to explain, but Poincaré explains this feeling very well. It's an unconscious feeling, and so that's why it can be seen in a sort of magical light, and perhaps there is an element of mysticism to it, and people do talk about this, and it's something that I'm interested in as well. What is the unconscious incubation process that Panare was talking about? Researchers today have actually confirmed that what may look like procrastination is actually a crucial part of ideation, or the part of the creative process which is unconscious. And that is really, really cool and really interesting, because you can be going about your day, you can be having your coffee, you can be going to work, riding the bus, you could be driving your car, taking a shower, and your mind may actually be unconsciously working through problems, creative process. And that's why a lot of people say they get their best ideas in the shower, and that's actually really true and really interesting from a scientific perspective. And why does this happen? It's because rest gives the mind a chance for fresh ideas to form. So that's the incubation process that I mentioned. This unconscious incubation process, along with circumstances, can combine to help ideas rise in the mind in the creative process. So what looks like a sudden spark of brilliance or creativity could actually be an unconscious mechanism at work. And so we're not fully aware that it's happening, but it is. And so that's why it's important to not constantly be working on something. It's good to have rest, it's good to take breaks, take space, and then you can come back. Poincaré also points out that the unconscious work must be preceded by conscious work and preparation. So it's not simply laying about doing nothing and expecting creative ideas and the creative process to be worked on. No, that is a part of it. However, it comes first with conscious work, effort, preparation, whether that's mentally or actually physically working on your technical skills. But it's not all unconscious, but that is a very important element to it, and that is possibly what we may feel as the intuitive side of creating and of the creative process. So what we can gather from this is that to create requires effort, preparation, and conscious work over time, while also utilizing creative intuition or the unconscious mind in the process. So you might be wondering, what does trauma have to do with all of this anyway? Well, people with trauma are often afraid of feeling their emotions because this can feel out of their control. Trauma responses are often unconscious and automatic in response to perceived threats. We can't always recognize when we're traumatized because, well, trauma occurs at an unconscious level. And traumatic memories may be stored in our unconscious. So trauma puts us into survival mode, which means we're focused on only staying safe, and this actually limits creativity. Imagine that you are a pet and you're in a new home and let's say you've experienced neglect or abuse and you're a rescue pet, and you might feel afraid to come out from your hiding spot. You'd be focused only on, when can I get some food, how can I stay safe, and you wouldn't be out there playing and being comfortable in your home at first. You'd be hiding and staying safe. And this isn't just an example, but it shows how trauma can put us into survival mode. If unconscious work plays a very key role in the creative process, then trauma surely affects the creative process because of how closely linked trauma is with the unconscious mind. Other factors affect the creative process too, though, like mood, motivation, the ability to experience flow. Passion is another influence. For example, the high desire to create. Many dimensions play a role in the process, and trauma can affect all of these factors, like your mood, the feeling that you want to create, or motivation, as well as the ability to stay in the moment, calm and concentrated. All of these things are affected by trauma, and they also are factors in being able to be creative. Dina Lynch, who had a TED Talk in 2021, talked about how songwriting actually brought her out of survival mode, out of hiding, and it gave herself validation for the trauma she'd gone through, as well as gave her a place to explore her emotions and trauma. So I think that the creative process can actually help us access our unconscious mind, and that is how it is really useful for healing trauma. And furthermore, if the creative process can actually improve our problem-solving skills and therefore our resilience over time, it makes sense then that engaging in creative arts actually can help trauma survivors heal as well in turn. So to me, there almost seems to be a symbiotic relationship between the creative process, healing trauma, and the arts. It goes both ways. So improving your creativity can be helped by engaging in things that heal trauma or are good for your mental health. If you do not have trauma, this can still apply to you. But the creative process itself is beneficial for trauma survivors. And that is what I find really, really interesting. That it goes both ways. And art gives us the vessel by which we can actually express ourselves, which is very, very crucial to healing. To be able to communicate, connect with other people is an important part for healing from trauma as well. But even more so than just healing individuals, as a collective, when we collaborate on art, on music, theater, acting, film, writing, whatever it is, when we join together to make art, this binds us together, and we realize that we are not alone, which is also very, very important in healing traumatized survivors. And it's not a coincidence that music was a key pillar in the civil rights movement in the United States. And similarly, a lesser-known story, and it's quite a remarkable one, is of one of the most successful peaceful protests in history, which is called the Singing Revolution, which happened in Estonia between 1987 and 1991. Hundreds of thousands gathered publicly to sing forbidden patriotic songs and speak patriotic speeches, which risked their lives to proclaim their desire for independence. And it's truly a remarkable example of the use of creativity, of music and song by a collective to heal together, and it resulted in freedom without violence. The creative process, in a way, is opposite to trauma. It allows us to fully embody our emotions, to access the unconscious mind, and to give voice to feelings that are suppressed by trauma. But a very, very common problem with PTSD, with CPTSD, with anyone who's experienced negative childhood experiences or any sort of trauma, it's very common for us to feel stuck and also to feel disconnected from our bodies and our sense of selves. And contemporary neuroscience teaches us that our sense of ourselves is actually deeply connected with our physical bodies. And this is an important part of being able to interpret feelings. And in order to actually come out of that stuck feeling, you actually need to reconnect with our physical body, with your physical body. And you can do that through physical movement, exercise, yoga, stretching, walking, cleaning, anything that engages the physical body, anything. It doesn't have to be stereotypical, strenuous exercise or heavy weightlifting. As long as you are moving your body, you're actually helping your trauma symptoms. However, it's really important that we understand the trauma experience, that it's not so simple and so black and white. Trauma cannot be understood merely in a logical way. Trauma causes immense suffering and actually fragments our experiences, which trauma can cause immense suffering and fragments our experiences and the way that we experience the world, our lives, and ourselves, which makes it difficult or even sometimes impossible to find meaning in it. And sometimes there is no meaning in trauma because sometimes it is, and more often than not, it is senseless, it is cruel, there is no meaning that can be found in abuse, in war, in hatred, hateful acts, in violence, in emotional violence, in neglect. Finding meaning in it isn't necessarily the point, and you don't need to find meaning in the actual traumatic experience. It's more so in how can we process it in a way that is helpful and healthy, and to keep going through life, to continue to find beauty in the world, to continue or to reconnect with our sense of self, and to actually go on, move on. And it's not necessarily that we're saying we're forgetting what happened. Nope. We're never forgetting what happened, but we're able to get up and to act and to express ourselves again, to engage with the world, to engage with creative arts, which is what my purpose is for me. And if you're watching this video, arguably your purpose, or at least you feel connected to the ideas that I am talking about. And this is really important because by saying that trauma could be understood and given meaning merely through art alone, either would not properly do trauma justice, and that is not the point of this video, but rather, what can we learn from it? What can we understand about trauma and the creative process and the unconscious mind? So, as a personal testimony, as a personal story, the way I experienced trauma, without going into too much detail about when, or the details don't really matter, but for me, I've experienced a feeling of being stuck, of being trapped, and feeling like I'm at sort of inside sort of like this bottomless black hole, a void almost, and that void is how I have experienced and described my trauma through therapy. And over time, the thing that I noticed always helped me the most was listening to music, singing out loud, dancing, moving, walking. It was the creative process combined with movement. Those two things are what helped me come out of that stuck feeling, and always helped me out of that overwhelming feeling I felt of being in sort of like a black hole that is very common for some trauma survivors. And this gave me the ability to process what I was going through, to eventually be able to express it verbally and not just inside my body. But it began with art, it began with music, it began with reconnecting with my body through physical movement. And I think that this is really, really important. It sounds so simple, but it's really, really what works. However, something interesting to note is that some argue that argue or hypothesize that because trauma can disconnect us from our bodies, our sense of selves, it actually can enable us to have altered states of consciousness to occur. And they are out of the ordinary. And so, arguably, people that have these types of experiences may be able to be more creative, to experience the world and themselves differently or in extraordinary ways. And so this is very interesting because, yes, the trauma experience can be one that is painful, it can be one that is suffering, it is often very, 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 very isolating and extremely painful. But the thing is, it does come with interesting possible effects. But these are just theories and just something interesting to note, that these altered states of consciousness, or the ability to access the unconscious mind in a different way, perhaps, than those who have not experienced trauma, might be useful and important to understanding the creative process as well. So that's just something that I find interesting. So there is an element of mysticism, of magic, I would say, in trauma and in the way the unconscious mind processes it, and how this can show up and show through in your art and in your creative process. However, the creative process also allows us to observe our thoughts, feelings, and selves in a calm state, which is arguably a key part of healing from trauma as well. Being able to be objective yet compassionate to ourselves allows us to become unstuck. So resilience is typically formed through agency, which is when you know you have the ability to act and you know you have the ability to make a difference. Making music, art, dancing, theater, any creative act, anything that involves the creative process, all help promote a sense of agency, because creation is an active thing. We're not passively creating. That's not possible. Although the unconscious mind may be working below the surface, creating to help you in the creative process, we are not passively creating anything. The creative process can help us get through that stuck feeling that can overtake trauma survivors by teaching us it's okay to act, to embody our feelings, to voice our innermost selves, to express ourselves, and to do something, anything. When trauma makes us hold back, suppress, and hide ourselves, makes us feel like we need to be smaller and to freeze. By writing, singing, drawing, painting, dancing, acting, or doing anything creative, we learn that it is safe to act, to be, to exist, and to do in this world. Little by little, every act of art is like a healing elixir. It doesn't cure trauma, but it gives us confidence to be a little more ourselves in this world and to take more space instead of simply retreating. So if you're out there and you're feeling stuck, I hope that this gives you the boost you need to make art, to create something, and to keep going, knowing that it's safe to do so. Make art like no one will ever see it, because that's where the magic of the creative process happens.